I got tired of walking around with a mask on, smiling but my heart singing sad songs. Yeah, I was living for myself, I was dead wrong till I got the call, no cell phone. Man, you talking to the real me.
Okay, Dr. Max, welcome to the Uncompromised Podcast. I always say at the start the Uncompromised program because I'm so used to onboarding clients like that. But, yeah. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of what this podcast or the purpose of the podcast is, I try and basically get experts on for men's health, performance, entrepreneurship, business, and everything in between really. So generally speaking, I always start with the same question of the nature of the program, the nature of the podcast is understanding perhaps you as an individual, as a professional, where in your lifetime maybe you were in a position where you were what I call compromised. You weren't your best authentic self, and I think it just gives us a natural, easy lead and trajectory into kind of where you started and how you got into being what you do. So do you want to give us a bit of a background in terms of, I know you talked to me before about jumping onto TRT. I think maybe that's a good place to start of, when you weren't at your best. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Andy. It's a pleasure to be on. But yeah, about 10 years ago, I had testicular cancer. Had my left testicle removed. Fortunately, that's kind of all that I needed treatment-wise. But then following the cancer and about 2 years after the cancer, I had viral meningitis. So I had a real sort of rough patch health-wise, and essentially that left me feeling pretty rubbish for a good 3 years, I would say. And it transpired that for those 3 years, I was essentially suffering from symptoms of low testosterone without realizing it myself, even though I was a doctor. I was a qualified GP by this point, saw multiple doctors during this sort of 3-year illness. And so for me, testosterone replacement therapy ended up changing my life hugely. Within weeks I noticed a change having gone on TRT. Within months it was completely sort of night and day changes, and so that's what really inspired me to end up really focusing in on men's health and particularly testosterone, but there's more to it than that. But yeah, so it was my own health journey that really, my compromised position was being unknowingly low testosterone impacted, essentially.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, mate. I can't imagine how tough that was. I mean, from our conversations before, I've had low testosterone myself, but getting testicular cancer is a whole nother realm, mate. So I'm sorry you went through that. For the guys that are listening, and I think this is a really important point that a lot of guys don't understand in today's society, is that so even as you said it as a GP, you were having all the signs and symptoms of low test but weren't aware of it, because I think a lot of the symptoms of low test can overlap with just normal day-to-day life these days, constant fatigue and stuff. So do you want to just give a bit of insight, if you can, into like what your day-to-day actually felt like when things were off?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of like physical and psychological symptoms. I think the kind of the sort of several major symptoms that I had were unrelenting fatigue. So even if I'd had a good night's sleep, I just woke up feeling tired and pretty rubbish. And brain fog, and probably the worst looking back was anxiety. Like it was just seemed to be that my resilience, my stress resilience was really down. So any sort of minor stresses, whether it's the kids, anything like that was really sort of profoundly impacting me. So probably brain fog, fatigue and anxiety were my worst symptoms. But looking back, probably quite a few things were linked to the low testosterone. So I was a bit more achy. My body composition probably wasn't as responsive as it is now. I was getting ill more often, so my immune system didn't seem to be as effective, and just more sort of just feeling old before my time, I guess. And that all kind of, I suppose the kind of culmination of all that was just I felt quite defeated. I just sort of felt like after 3 years in, it really did feel like, well, this is your lot now. You've had some blood work done and didn't check testosterone for several years, not realizing that could be relevant. But it's kind of like I tried therapy, meditation. I've always been into exercise, so I was trying to kind of manage that alongside the fatigue, nutrition, supplements, I went on antidepressants for a while.
Oh.
I kind of tried everything that a sort of GP, I suppose, would think about, and nothing really made much of a dent. I mean, meditation was maybe a bit of a calming moment, but in terms of day to day, nothing really seemed to make a dent in the symptoms. And so it was probably the biggest part of it was just feeling like, right, this is how I've sort of resolved that I'm going to be living now.
Yeah, mate, I relate to so much of that, and I think so many people listening will relate to that as well, because I mean, it's becoming a lot more common knowledge now, and there's a lot more like media and promotion around it, and education, which is great. But I think so many guys, especially guys over 30 and those kind of generations and even older, because it was such a normal kind of mindset to be of just like get on with things as well. Most guys who have that lived experience, for the ones that I speak to that respectively are older than me, have always just kind of had that mentality of just get on with it, bury your head, this is just part of getting older, and you kind of develop an internal narrative and story that this is just normal, and it really isn't. And I think you'll be able to give more insight into this in more than I will with patients, but I think there's a lot of normalized symptoms and stuff that goes on with multiple dysfunctions and pathology and diseases, where because you get used to it, especially with things like fatigue, you forget what normal actually feels like because it becomes your daily lived experience. And so many guys just power through that and then mask it with things like caffeine or other supplements or things that they basically become crutches and vices for your suffering, basically. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, I look back and I kind of went through a list of possible diagnoses. Like I was even exploring the idea, is this some sort of unresolved childhood trauma that I didn't realise was there? Or was it, was it something to do with the cancer? Was I more kind of psychologically impacted by the cancer than I appreciated at the time? It was, you kind of go through your head thinking what could be causing these symptoms. But like you said, it's a lot of the time as well, so I don't know if I necessarily had too many crutches. I suppose caffeine was one in terms of trying to get up and go and kind of like trying various supplements to see if it did help. I think what a lot of people, like you say, kind of get into the habit of is that they kind of have their own habits that kind of deal with each part of the day. So morning is caffeine, and then afternoon or evening is alcohol to get to sleep and sort of calm down. So it's kind of that sort of idea that your day is managed by whatever external sort of drug that you can kind of use to get through it. And I think a lot of the time as well with hormonal issues, sadly, is a lot of men end up at least being offered or going on antidepressants, mistakenly sort of diagnosing it as a kind of primary mental health issue rather than saying, actually, this is a downstream effect of a hormonal problem. And that certainly happened to me. I mean, I was on and off antidepressants over a period of about a year, and they certainly didn't fix the root of the issue, kind of rather just made me feel more numb, I think, which was better than feeling severely anxious, but it wasn't the solution.
For sure. No, it's a really good point, and it was actually a question I was going to bring up to you, that because obviously in the realm that you work in now with testosterone replacement therapy, I found from the amount of, I've recently just launched some ads, and the amount of inbound messages I'm getting from guys saying, Andy, I'm on TRT, but I feel like shit. And I think TRT has almost become now the new antidepressant for men, because it's almost this blanket statement treatment that, okay, if you feel off, just go on TRT, you'll be magically fixed. And that's one of the things I really respect about you and what Alphagenics do is, the actual health first approach screening. Okay, you might have some other stuff going on other than just testosterone deficiency or primary hypergonadism, and that is one of the things that I wanted to speak to you about, because I know is it perhaps I wanted to basically explore why you ended up leaving, say, being a GP and kind of like conventional medicine to go into more specializing with this. Like, what was the driving force for that?
I think it just became too apparent that the kind of the nature of my work was just too different. It was kind of like general practice was very much so 10-minute in and out, go, and it was kind of really you were trying to find the solution that didn't it didn't often involve getting to the root cause of things. So the work I do now, so I work for Alphagenics looking, like you say, at men's health and whether TRT is appropriate or other interventions. And then the other work I do is through a company called My Atlas, Atlas Health. Yeah, and that's kind of more, kind of, again, root cause analysis. What is the best next steps for someone? Because I don't begrudge GPs, because largely speaking, you've got 10 minutes, whereas I would have at least half an hour, often an hour appointment. So in that time, you can really get to know what's going on, rather than, 10 minutes is very much so
symptomatic, isn't it? You just go, what are you struggling with? Here's the best I can do with the time I've got. I'll try this, see if it helps. And I've always said this, especially with my clients, it's something that there's this kind of like online camp thing of like conventional versus functional, and there's a lot of egos in both camps. And I think the most important thing to bring it back to is it's like, okay, well, people's health's the most important, and what you've got to realize is conventional doctors are doing an amazing job. They keep you alive. They're checking for pathology. They don't have the resources, especially in the NHS, I think, the time resources, and to really, like you say, dive deep for individuals. So for what they have resource wise, they do an amazing job. But for a lot of people, it's a very individualized case, which is why blood work can be such a powerful tool, to really look at someone's health as a bigger picture. So there's, and I think that's always something I've really tried to make clear, is that whenever I'm talking about functional ranges, it's not to discredit the work, GPs and conventional medicine do, but the actual intention behind it is different. That, in my opinion, they're trying to save lives and you check for pathology, not health optimization. Unfortunately, they don't have the bandwidth to check for that. Would you say that's a fairly fair
100%.
assessment?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so I think my wife's a GP, and she's still in the sort of NHS model. My dad's a GP. He's like sort of 72. He's still going in the NHS general practice world. And so, I see what she still has to do and what my dad goes through as well. And I think exactly like you said, that they're basically avoiding they're trying to pick up dangerous diagnoses to avoid missing them, and life-threatening stuff. Now, what we're talking about really is I don't think they're necessarily best placed to handle optimizing or looking for ultimate well-being, so how you feel and function on a day-to-day basis. That's not really what they're there to do, almost, in a sense. They're there to avoid death imminently, or missing a cancer, or missing a heart disease that's those sorts of things. And although they talk about preventative medicine, again, that's very much pharmaceutically driven, whereas obviously, as we know, a lot of preventative medicine is the kind of, you say it's the boring stuff, but it's
pillars
a lot of
health.
Exactly.
Sleep, walking, water.
And you can't do that in 10 minutes. It's not possible. And plus, as well, there is a I always think there's a degree of something in this idea that in our areas we can follow up people with even more time as well. So even if you have a half an hour appointment with someone, then you might speak again in a week, or you might speak again in 6 weeks, and that kind of re-emphasizes the importance of tracking things and saying, right, this is what we spoke about, are you doing it? Whereas a GP wouldn't really, they've got a demand to manage. They've got a demand to manage. So if they've got 1,000, each GP might have 2,000 patients assigned to them, and it's just not quite how it works. But so every day they might have 30, 40 patient contacts. That's just, they've got to manage their demand as well, in terms of they've got to leave room for acute stuff. Whereas you and I, we've got this ability to kind of manage our time more specifically, because we're not dealing with life and death potentially, or missing a meningitis or anything like that. We're kind of dealing with more, how do you feel today? How do we want to feel? And how do we want to look in 10, 20 years, So it's a very different mindset, really. So it's almost we're not necessarily playing the same sport, I suppose, is a way to think about it.
Yeah. And I think that's a very misconceived public opinion, is that it's like when you just guys go, oh, I want to get my bloods done, but there's not enough education, and understandably, unless you really want to get into it, of like what is your GP looking for versus what we might be looking for? You know, and that's why they get conflicting, and you probably have felt a relatability to that in your experience with seeing multiple GPs, but they weren't looking for the same things. You know, they were looking for pathology versus optimization, and or even just baseline level of testosterone in your case. And you know, I think one of the things I'm really pushing for now, and it's why in my coaching program I've extended the term that I work with guys is for 12 months, because what I say to guys is, look, if you're looking to optimize your health but also remain healthy, these are going to be habits and systems that need to be built into your life over time. And a question I always say to guys before joining is, how many years has it taken you to get to your starting point now of where you are coming to me? And they'll go, oh, I felt like this for 5 years, 10 years. And I'm like, okay, do you honestly expect me to be able to help fix this issue in 12 weeks or a 6-week shred? You know, and that's something I'm really pushing for now, is that almost, I always screw this word up, longitudinal data. So having 6 months and 3 month, maybe quarterly testing, 6 month baseline, big full comprehensive panel test. And then based on that, okay, well, you were out in, say, thyroid, vitamin D was low, free test wasn't at its best. We'll retest the ones that were out on a quarterly basis. And I think I'd love to see, and I think it is going that way, how not medicine in itself, but healthcare and how people perceive the health is very much becoming more of a thing for people to want to know about their biomarkers and their data, and preventative healthcare in that sense. Okay, I'm starting to trend towards a pattern recognition for vitamin B deficiency or iron deficiency, things like that, and because you can pick up on it before it gets to that pathological disease state or, you know, life-threatening situations, which I think is a great thing. And I think we're going to see a big rise in technology that's really tracking things like that over time. Hopefully for the right reasons, because it'll help people. But I know there's also a lot of money to be made in data scraping from companies and big companies like that as well. So it's going to be an interesting time, I think, over the next 5 to 10 years. With like preventative angle and technology with tracking this kind of stuff, and it's going to get cheaper as well, which is good for everyone.
I think one thing that I do often, which I'm always kind of surprised, well, I was surprised when I was doing this work, is in how much patients appreciated it, was I just go through their blood results and explain what it means. And I think, you know, sometimes, you know, you say like there can be signs of how things match together. So, you know, like a hormonal issue impacting your liver, you know, maybe you've got some fatty liver disease or insulin resistance. So, you know, sometimes just literally going through the panels and saying, this could likely represent some of this. This is what we should do about it. I think just understanding that can be really useful and really sort of empowering, because you could get the results and say, oh, your bloods, I've looked at your bloods, mate, and it looks like you've got fatty liver disease and you've got pre-diabetes, so you need to lose weight and work out more, X, Y, and Z. But actually, if you show them what you mean and show them how things tie together, I think there's a degree of a male aspect to this. We like to see the numbers and understand what they mean. And I think that in itself can be quite useful and informative and almost empowering, because like you said then as well, you follow those results up down the line and you can see, oh, look, that's improved, this is improved. And maybe it's not where we want it to be yet, but it's going in the right direction. So positive trends as well can be handy.
For sure. I think men as well, like you say, are quite logical. So like they like to have to understand the rationale behind it. And it also, I know from a coaching perspective, it creates a lot of buy-in to the process as well. Because when you can explain to them maybe why a system's not worked, and you can especially explain and link it to symptoms and say, this could be why you're feeling like this, suddenly they have an understanding and feel empowered of, okay, I don't want to feel like this symptom. I understand the process. I know the actions I need to take to undo it or minimize that symptom, you know, especially when it comes to things like fatigue, you know, vitamin D, B vitamins, again, I keep talking about, but those things that some guys as well think it's always testosterone, but it's not. It could just be, you know, you might have gut issues, you're not absorbing nutrients effectively and assimilating them, and there's all these things. Once you, like you say, once you can explain the rationale, it creates that buy-in. So a question I did want to ask you, which you must see this all the time as well, even with guys who have, say, primary hypergonadism, they jump on TRT. and say they still don't feel good. Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, yes and no in a way, because I think if you select correctly, often you do get good results. But like you say, there is a lot of guys out there who are going on TRT usually just blindly off a blood result, to be honest. So, you know, it's like, yes, you tick a box to say it's low enough to consider treatment. There you go. So that means the answer is TRT. And so, yeah, ultimately it's about that kind of, I don't call it like a selection criteria, but it's working out the appropriate cases to go on TRT or not, or whether you do follow things up down the line and see if you can improve it naturally. So I've got a reasonable rate of people doing well but that's probably because I do have that time and I don't sort of, sounds silly, but I don't make money from just sort of like a cookie cutter sort of run of, you know, sort of next in, TRT, no, TRT. It's kind of like a much more detailed assessment. Yeah. But I think that's how some of it does work, sadly. And I was shocked by the fact that I still see patients who are, it should never really happen, but still see men who go on testosterone replacement therapy just based off a testosterone level. So they don't have any more blood work done than a testosterone result. They're told, oh, your level is let's say 7, 8, 9, something like that. You should go on TRT. And it's kind of like, wow, that's not just kind of a disservice. That's actually rather dangerous. But so yeah, but you do see it a lot. Men go on TRT, and I think the problem is this is a really hard balance to strike. So testosterone replacement therapy can be an incredible intervention in someone's life. It was in mine, so I'm sort of a huge advocate of it. But it's not a panacea, so it's not going to fix everything. And sometimes it can even make things worse if you're putting it into a dodgy foundation. So if your lifestyle is really out of kilter, and then you add more testosterone into a situation where your body's actually suppressing testosterone for a reason, that can actually make things worse. You know, that's where you see a lot of guys online or in general, they report a lot of side effects. Well, it's because it's kind of like, well, your body's not in a state to accept a lot of testosterone. You've got a lot of inflammation. You've got a lot of like downstream effects from just poor health, and you kind of, it's not necessarily adding fuel to a fire, but it's a good way of wording it. You know, you're kind of chucking in a hormone that your body's deliberately suppressing and saying this should fix it, whereas actually, you know, it's not really the answer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was speaking to one of my clients about that because he had like elevated cholesterol. He's showing signs of fatty liver, and you know, it's like, well, your body's could be suppressing testosterone as a way of like, you know, your body has to process hormones in the system as well. So if you add more in, it has to process them as well. It's going to overload a system that's already overburdened, like you say. So it's like, okay, can we see some improvements in terms of what I call phase 1 restoration first with your health markers, and then you maybe in phase 2, which is performance, bring in TRT as a secondary thing once the system has a stronger foundation to just function properly first. And that's, I think, what most men are missing, is they just think it's just that instant fix, and it's really not. Or it can be in some cases, but for a lot of guys, especially like what you said with, you know, when you were struggling and you considered therapy and trauma, like there's a lot of guys whose lived experience is actually, the root cause is psychological. It's the fact that they're living an uninspired life. It's the fact that their work is so stressful and it's destroying their confidence, how they're showing up, not something they want to do. You know, that internal stress drive and sympathetic wired and tired response can suppress testosterone as well. So this is why I always say to guys, like with what we do, we have our cell health audit, which is just, it's a thorough subjective questionnaire to really look at, okay, what's your lifestyle like? How are you showing up in your relationships? How do you feel about yourself? Do you have a clear, what I call North Star driven purpose? Because there is research linked to that if you don't and your life is rubbish, then it can reduce testosterone, it can increase cortisol, like all these things that play in effect. So it's important, as you said, to get the bigger picture of someone's health as a whole, not just, okay, yes, you test low, let's put you on. Yeah. I think that's something that, to be honest, the longer I've been in this world now, having left NHS work and kind of looking more, it's overused word perhaps, but like holistically at things, is that side of it, that psychological, even tilting into the spiritual side of life, I think is something that I've become more and more aware of and appreciative of it, because it's kind of like, you can have guys who are kind of exercising regularly, they've got good exercise habits, they're eating well, they don't, they're not drinking loads of booze, they're looking at their sleep and things, and something cannot be quite right. And sometimes it is the fact that they don't like their work, they don't have a target in life, they don't have, a kind of reason to be, almost, in a sense, like you say, a purpose, a North Star. And I think that is something that I've become more appreciative of over time, simply because you can have a lot of your other ducks in a row, but if there's not a reason you're putting them in a row, it's kind of like, feels kind of meaningless almost, in a sense. And that meaninglessness can I think, like you say, make you feel anxious, stressed, impact you on multiple levels. So yeah, it's certainly an area that I've kind of become more aware of. I think for me, a lot of what I kind of learnt about testosterone and men's health early days was from personal experience. So perhaps when I went into this work, I didn't quite appreciate that element to it, because I kind of had kids, my wife, my work was kind of had my raison d'etre as such. But yeah, there's a lot of particularly young men, I don't know if you find this, who kind of, they're looking for that kind of that North Star, really, because online world can be confusing. You can have different idols that you look up to. You might fall into the wrong crowd potentially as well. So yeah, that's a bit of a ramble, but I think I find it interesting, because when we spoke last time, I thought that's a really good point, something that I'm becoming aware of as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, like most people do, I fully embody that belief system because it's what changed my life. I've gone through that process of entering into spiritual development, doing a lot of trauma work, and I was stuck in a sympathetic dominant response, so like that kind of, frozen, they call it fight or flight or freeze, right? In the sympathetic response, I was frozen, and which was basically meant I couldn't digest food. I wasn't in that parasympathetic rest and digest, so my digestion was always really bad because I was stuck in kind of a trauma response, and that meant my digestion, I couldn't absorb nutrients properly, or I wasn't, and over time that can obviously downstream affect, if you've not got the building blocks for testosterone, it can affect that, and that was my lived experience. So it's now something I'm quite passionate about, of promoting for guys, or at least just asking the question, like you say, holistically looking into it, because a really cool concept I got from Peter Crone was this idea of, and you could call it far-fetched, but if we're saying, right, there is clinical studies that show lack of purpose leads to suppressed testosterone or lower levels of testosterone in men. He talks about this concept of, imagine your brain and your belief systems are the house that you live in, right? And when we're talking about it from a testosterone perspective, if that house has mold in it, or you have, that basically represents your belief systems, like positive self-actualization and positive, no mold in the house or the room. But if you have these belief systems that you're not good enough, that you're a bad person, that you're not worthy of love, all of these things, those thoughts are the mold in the house. Now you can leave the house and you can take a shower, you can go work out, you can get some water on board. When you return to the house, that internal operating system of belief is still there, that limiting belief is moldy. And that can ultimately affect your physiological biology in terms of hormone triggering. If you're depressed, if you don't believe in yourself that you're worthy, that can internally change your unique biology. And it was that's an analogy that I now use with guys of like, okay, well, we need to fix these belief systems because they could be influencing how your body is responding to things day to day. And it's, people could call it far-fetched, but I think it's a pretty cool analogy to think about, like until you change on an identity level, you're always going to be operating with a dysfunctional system.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it comes back to that basic idea that what we did incorrectly in medicine was we split the brain from the rest of the body in terms of a kind of like our mental health is viewed very much as a separate system to our physiology, whereas actually obviously in reality what even you're getting at there is the fact that what goes on in here does affect your physiology. I mean, it's obvious when you think about it being one connected machine or entity or being, but I think the problem is people often associate, and this comes back to hormones as well, like sort of my anxiety was very much so driven by a hormonal issue, which, you know, so you could say anxiety is a mental health condition, whereas actually it was driven by a physiological problem. And it's the same thing with you know, your thoughts, your perception of the world, your stress responses, your chronic stress impacts the rest of your body, because it was all interconnected essentially. And I think what I look back at my old GP days and feel like is that we kind of treat the brain or the mental health as a completely separate thing to people's physiology, which is obviously inaccurate to do. But so what you're getting at does make a lot of sense when you think about it that way as well.
For sure. And I mean, even if you're talking about from a purely scientific biology perspective, it's like, you know, we have things like the gut brain axis, you know, and it's like it is interconnected. So, you know, if you've got a dysfunctional gut brain axis, serotonin production that's produced in, you know, in your digestive system, it might take hindering. So if you're not producing the serotonin and you're feeling depressed, is it a psychological issue, or is it, as you say, a physiological issue in the gut that you're not producing? So it's like, you know, I think when we talk about it like that, it seems obvious, but it's not as commonly accepted, or at least thought about from that perspective. Especially, I've got a couple of American clients, and I know for sure things are progressively different over there in terms of pharmaceutical companies just prescribing a pill for anything. You know, it's symptoms. Oh, you've got this symptom, take this one, and you need to take this one to counteract the side effects of this one, and then it just becomes this cascade of symptomatic merry-go-round as opposed to actually addressing the root cause issues. So one question
it's like the girl who swallowed the fly, isn't it? That's what it always reminds me of. It's kind of like you swallow the fly, so you have to swallow a spider, you have to swallow, so it's kind of like you're chasing symptoms that then you're chasing side effects from the medications, and it's kind of like before you know it you end up on 10 tablets and you're not quite sure what half of them are there for. Yeah,
for sure. It's and a lot of people don't realize that's what's happening either. You know, like I'm so reluctant to take medicine at all. I always try and I'm quite stubborn. I'm just like, let my body try and heal itself first if I can, unless I really need to go, which might not be the best idea, but I've always stuck by me. I've built a pretty resilient immune system from doing it. So one question I did have for you, Max, was with doing, for my Atlas and looking at things over a broader spectrum, like full comprehensive panels and things like that. For men specifically, what tend to be the most prominent dysfunctions, if you want to call them that? I call them health handbrakes. It's kind of a catchy term. But what do you see the most? Because for me, it's kind of hormonal imbalance, metabolic issues, or like metabolic syndrome, some kind of stress-induced intolerance for the body, and nutrient deficiencies or gut issues. They're kind of why I call the core 4 to 5 issues I see. What kind of shows up for you?
100%. I mean, I wouldn't probably disagree with any of those ones really. Probably what I've noticed changing would be more thyroid issues in men. You know, because if you think about it historically, kind of like, you know, if you look at the data on it, I think it's about 80% plus of thyroid issues are classically female problems, whereas seeing a lot of, you know, whether it's autoimmune or just poor thyroid output. And that always intrigues me, because when you see these patterns, you're kind of trying to work out, right, what is causing this? And like you said, it could be linked to gut health, it could be environmental factors, lack of sunshine, stress. All of these things do kind of obviously impact our health, including our thyroid. But yeah, I would agree with you. Hormonal issues, metabolic issues, so see a lot of fatty liver disease, micronutrient deficiencies, and gut really. And obviously the thing about them is they're all intertwined with each other. So sometimes it's a little bit of investigatory
chicken
work.
Or the egg.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of like, do you have fatty liver disease because you've had undiagnosed low testosterone for a long time, or do you have low testosterone because you have fatty liver disease and poor metabolic health. And so it's kind of a lot of the work, whether it's testosterone, thyroid, or symptoms wise, is a lot of chicken and egg work. That's kind of exactly what a lot of your work ends up. You're just basically trying to untangle this kind of sort of ball of spaghetti, really, just trying to work out what's the next best step, really.
For sure. I think one thing I wanted to ask you around was an understanding of nutrition and things like in terms of when you became, a doctor through, I'd imagine, university and stuff, like insights into nutrition, because I think this is even in, say, like personal training, where I started out as a personal trainer and then got more qualified to specialize and become a coach in men's health. But even in there, like the basic nutrition information I learned as a personal trainer was so minimal. And I've got a couple of clients who are doctors who are they're in great shape. They love having the programming, the strength and conditioning, but it sometimes surprises me even then when I'm talking to them about nutrition. They're like, oh, I didn't know that, or we didn't learn that, or like, and these are like educated guys. So could you give me some insight into like what nutrition education was like for you?
Very minimal. I can't really remember. I'm sure there was some sort of degree of teaching about it, but I suspect, looking back, if I can kind of picture what it was basically with relation to things like kwashiorkors and things like that. Things that you'll see in Africa from starvation. So it's kind of like this is the minimum fat, carbohydrate, protein, or you don't really have a minimum carbohydrate potentially to exist, but kind of it was saying like, below this level is disease. And I suppose that's kind of quite rings true for a lot of medicine, like we were talking about before, is kind of like you were told what to look out for, rarely in the UK obviously, but sort of malnourishment essentially on a more kind of disease state, rather than what we're talking about, which is kind of like you say about how do you eat well. So yeah, not any great detail as to kind of like what should people be eating on a regular basis to kind of maintain optimal functioning. It was very much so, here's the minimum, almost like the RDA of kind of basic nutrition.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, because it's like one thing I've seen as well, especially in America, is they've almost like revamped their nutrition pyramid and like completely
flipped it,
haven't they? Which is good to see, but it's just like, you'll know, because you're into the research, you live it day to day, and I read stuff as well. It's like how far behind they are to what's actually current and relevant. It's like they're just, no wonder the general public doesn't really know where to start, because when you're looking online about all this conflicting information, and this is something I always say to my clients when they say, Andy, I need to get leaner, what diet should I have? And I'm like, get your bloods done, it depends, some person is going to massively benefit from a lower carbohydrate ketogenic diet for a prolonged period if they've got insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, or like it depends at any given time, but the main message is not overly restricting, try and include a bit of everything, but this is why I think it's so hard for people, because you're just getting these gurus that just promote so hard one dogmatic style of nutrition, and it's
being in the business industry yourself, in terms of you'll know more about business than me as such. But don't you find that what sells is kind of black and white answers, whereas in reality, I always say this, there's a lot of nuance, because people will, carnivore, vegan, keto, all of these, they're quite simple to explain to people, and you can really kind of like blow them up and say, well, this is why ancestrally we were only supposed to eat these things and this sort of thing, and it sells, it sounds cool, and then lo and behold, you end up buying someone's, course on carnivore eating or something like that. Whereas, really, like you said, I mean, people can be different, but also there can be a little bit of variation between what people can eat. So, can you have a healthy diet which is, got a lot of meat in? Probably, yeah. I mean, for a lot of guys, they need a lot of protein, healthy fats, all of these things. And can you get away with low carbs or high carbs? It's very individual. It depends on how active you are, what's your gut health like, what else you're eating, how you're sleeping, all of these. Are you trying to gain weight, lose weight? You're trying to gain muscle, you're trying to lose fat. It's kind of like you say, but the problem is that doesn't siphon down into like a 30-second Instagram post. So it's like, this is not necessarily the stuff that gets clicks online. So I think we've got an issue with nutrition in the sense of, I think a lot of people, which is bizarre, we're never really taught about it even at school level, which seems crazy. GPs, general practice, that's not really their kind of remit either in terms of going into any great detail with you on what you should be eating. And then online, which is where a lot of people now do like to go to get their information, because there is a bit more variation out there. There's a bit of people, like ourselves, hopefully trying to educate a little bit out there. But then you'll get down you'll get down the algorithm of sort of, like you say, more sensationalist takes on diet, training, this sort of thing, or you must train to failure every session, or you've only got to eat meat because otherwise plants will kill you. So it's kind of like, it can get confusing in that lane as well. So it is difficult. It's kind of, there's booby traps everywhere, I think, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, off the back of that, I've almost when you said, go down the rabbit hole type concept, was I had a guy come to me who was struggling with low test. He was overweight. He was clinically obese, if you were looking at it from that perspective. Obviously, I wasn't diagnosing him, but just from his weight and height, etc. And he was like, I don't get it, Andy. I got my bloods done, and then I ran them through ChatGPT for a protocol and what I should do. And I was like, oh, here we go. Because I get so many, like I speak to guys all the time and they jump on calls and they're like, why should we pay when I could get the information for free in ChatGPT? And I'm like, be very careful, because this guy had, I think ChatGPT had given him a protocol, and it was nearly like 25 supplements he was meant to be taking. And like, this goes back to that symptomatic. It's like, okay, its answer was that, okay, if you're deficient in this, deficient in this, deficient in this, take this, and it's if it was as easy as that, amazing, but it's not. It's there's no rationale behind this kind of thing. Do you think there's a danger for people going down that route?
Yeah, I mean, because I've played around with some of the AI systems, and what people don't quite realise is how much your prompting influences their answer as well. So that sort of a lot of the output you get is, because you can argue with it and say, let's say I ask it, does testosterone cause X, Y, and Z? And it will say, well, the data, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, well, what about this, though? And then it will change its kind of tone and answer a little bit more. And then you say something else, and it changes. And then you've ended up basically making it kind of disagree with its initial statement, because it's kind of like following off your prompts. So I think, like you say, for that chap, it could end up going down a rabbit hole of supplement advice, rather than maybe going down the route of what a lot sounds like you need at that stage is a lot of lifestyle advice and things. So it's really promptable, pushable down certain directions. And obviously the other thing is sometimes it's just incorrect. Some of the stuff that you'll get out of it is not right. And this will probably all change in the future, no doubt. But I mean, I've sort of, when it first started looking at it, I thought, oh my God, this is probably going to take me out of some of my work. It's gonna make me unemployed. But then I started using it a little bit, and I was like, I think I'm all right.
for the foreseeable.
Yeah, exactly.
It is going to be really exciting though to see how it develops in terms of, especially things for like, I'd imagine for GPs, how much it's just going to help them in terms of like prescription-based stuff and the ability, like we talked about, perhaps giving accountability and follow-ups will be a really big benefit of AI that can actually almost systemize patient care in the future. Because I think its ability to critically think with, say, maybe like what you do as an experienced or previous experienced GP is like, it doesn't have that ability to differentiate lived experience versus just like data, and that's where it's still yet to catch up. But from a prescription and dosages and things like that, I think it's going to be a really useful thing in the future.
Oh, 100%. I think doctors are, if I might be speaking out of term here, but I think they are being encouraged to engage with the AI systems and use it. Because obviously for a GP, a big issue of a general practitioner, and I'm the same, I have limitations of my knowledge, is because they are basically seeing potentially everything present at the door, they won't know about certain things, and that's just natural. So, using a bit of ChatGPT or something to look up this random blood disorder that 1 in 10,000 people have, that's going to be really handy. It's going to be a lot quicker as well than Google and finding which result on the search engine gets you. It's going to be like straight up, what do these blood results mean in terms of like maybe high globulins, low white blood cells. It's kind of like comes up with, this is a red flag for X, Y, and Z. So I think definitely have a real good role there. But I think in terms of taking over our roles, at least for now, I think it's long off that, really, from what I've seen. Fortunately.
Yeah, well, the other side of it. Yeah, of course. The other side of things as well is, at the end of the day, we're social beings. People are always going to crave connection of actually seeing somebody as well. So I don't think you're at risk, or doctors in general are at risk just yet. But okay, mate. So I've got a few questions, almost like quick fire questions that I wanted to ask you. If you just give me a minute, I'll just pull them up. Just fall under kind of your line of expertise. So, most overrated supplement for men. Well, if I specify more, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I like it. Probably a lot of the testosterone boosters out there are kind of probably oversold, really.
Like Turkesterone.
Yes, yeah, that's probably the one that's the overblown one. Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that one. Yeah. 100%.
Okay. So on the other side of things, most underrated supplement just for general health, and then as a second caveat for testosterone support.
Probably D3. Vitamin D. I think. I think probably if people do take it, often it's underdosed as well because they don't get their blood work. They don't see what's going on with the levels. So I remember I was taking some vitamin D in a multivitamin, but
25 IUs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I think I take, is it 4,000 or 5,000 IUs a day now?
Me too. And I live in Spain.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I've got pale skin, so it probably means I convert quite well when I do see the sunlight. But yeah, it's probably vitamin D. I just think that a few of the basics are always undervalued. Magnesium. I like magnesium, particularly for active guys. But yeah, vitamin D, I would say top of that list.
Yeah, amazing. I would agree. Yeah, I was literally going to say vitamin D, magnesium, potentially like a vitamin B complex, maybe.
Yeah.
And a little bit of nuance on the magnesium. This is something I say to guys of the benefits of maybe doing a one-off genetic methylation test, because looking at the different forms of actually different types of supplementation, biglycinated, methylated, there is differentiation there that guys can benefit from, of what am I predisposed to be able to absorb and assimilate best. That is something I always say to guys. So that kind of leads me on to my next question. If somebody had, say, a budget of £500, what would the first and best test you advise be for men looking to look at their health?
Yeah, I think a sort of a detailed health blood panel, I would say. That would probably be what I would say. Because with 500, you're still going to have some spare cash after that as well. But yeah, I would say blood work. So that would include sort of probably like there's I'm just picturing it in my head in terms of like my atlas. There's sort of like the ultimate performance blood work, which is kind of blood count, organ function, detailed lipids, insulin sensitivity checks, thyroid plus your antibodies, your sex hormones. So probably like a detailed blood panel like that would be what I would be thinking. Obviously, it wouldn't cost 500, but maybe if you wanted some follow-up to go through the results with someone who could help you interpret the results. Yeah.
Amazing. And final question. What do you think the biggest lie in the men's health industry is?
Oh, gosh. The biggest lie.
Or biggest myth. We could go with myth. Love a bit of myth busting.
I suppose in my field, it would be I don't know if it's the biggest lie in the whole field though, but I would say, like you were touched upon earlier, would be this idea that TRT will fix all your issues, which is weird coming from a kind of huge advocate of it. But I think that kind of idea that this one solution will fix all of your issues is the biggest lie, whether it be TRT, whether it be the carnivore diet, whether it be this supplement. This is going to make you turn from, you know, a guy who's tired all the time watching Netflix, eating takeaway pizza. It's all of a sudden going to take you to looking like Ryan Reynolds, and you're going to be, you know, getting all the women and stuff. So I think it's probably that selling of one thing, I think, is the biggest lie.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Appreciate that. Okay, mate, thank you so much for coming on. Last thing I'm going to say for you is, I always do this for every guest, is plug your shit. Where can people find you? You can talk about your book.
Yeah. So find me at alphagenics.co.uk. People can book in through there or get their blood work done and get it assessed by myself. Same with my Atlas. That's changed recently from atlaslaboratories.co.uk to my Atlas. So, or Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram. I think it's just Dr. Max Draper. And then, yeah, this is had my testosterone decoded. I've always got it on my desk here to plug it. So testosterone decoded, understanding testosterone, TRT, and male hormone health. So that was kind of 5 years in the making, really, I would say. But I wrote it in the last year or so, and it was basically a culmination of all the sort of knowledge that I wanted to impart on people about what I'd learned about testosterone from the very beginning to the end, in terms of what it is, why it matters as a hormone, you know, what's the problem when it is low in terms of symptoms, long-term health, how to get it assessed, and what to do if there is a problem. And I think I've dedicated more than a whole chapter to sort of talking about lifestyle beyond, you know, before or beyond the TRT side of it. And I think in the conclusion, like we've spoken about, I think in the conclusion I mentioned something along the lines of, you know, this book has been repetitive in talking about lifestyle, and that has been deliberate in terms of, you know, TRT is powerful, but unless you're kind of addressing other things before or alongside, depending on your kind of case, but you're going to miss out on a lot of things if you don't look at the whole picture, really.
Amazing. Thank you so much, mate. And yeah, thanks as always for your time. I'll drop everything in, I'll get the links off you, I'll put everything in the caption for everyone. But guys, show it some love, comment, like, share. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.